There aren't many bands that change drastically over the course of their respective histories, but the ones that do end up being some of the most famous. Queen changed, Pink Floyd changed, Led Zeppelin changed, the Beach Boys changed, and surprise surprise, the Beatles did as well. The change all started on this album, Rubber Soul. What's astonishing to me about this album is that it was released only 4 months after Help. In just 4 months' time, they were able to dramatically shift their musical direction from simplistic rock and roll bangers to some absolutely complex and mind-blowing craftsmanship. Rubber Soul is honestly landmark, and whether you like the songs in it or not, some of the material on this album has not even been replicated to this day. There's not many albums like this one here when you talk about how different a direction it is compared to their previous work. I know I said that in Help, the band was trying to incorporate new instruments into their standard love songs, but here, they not only go further instrumentally, but lyrically as well. This is a very mature album from any way you look at it, so regardless of what my opinion on this album's quality is, it's highly regarded as one of the most innovative albums ever recorded. I'll do my best to explain the innovativeness of the tracks as we go along, but let's not waste any more time and take a look at the turning point of the Beatles' career, Rubber Soul. Baby, you can drive my car, and baby, I love you. We start off with an actually humorous song in Drive My Car. It's also, believe it or not, the first album opener to be Lennon-McCartney since No Reply. It's even more interesting that only 2 Lennon-McCartney collaborations have made it to the side opener. Regardless, this one has a mixed reception in the Beatles community. Some think it's among their best songs, and some think it's among their worst. Yeah, quite a start we have here. But the biggest reason might be because of the melody to this one. The verses do sound a bit off, but that's actually because John and Paul are singing the same line in a different key. As a result, you get quite a contrasting harmony that may be off-putting at first, but personally, I freaking love the sound of the harmony. It only got beat out by the catchy beep beep yeah at the end of each chorus. Speaking of the chorus, that's when the piano comes in to accompany the guitar work, which is already exceptional. The piano would have been the highlight, but the bass work in the song is really great. I don't just mean that by the fact that it sounds good, I mean it basically carries the song right on its back, and personally I'd rank it among one of Paul McCartney's greatest moments on bass. The melody on that bass, though, honestly, is just incredible, and to me, is what makes the verses the best part of the track. I get that the melody of the harmony might not be for everyone, but the melody on the bass definitely holds its own. Lyrically, this is actually the weakest song on the album because there's not much that goes on here aside from a bunch of double entendre. To be honest though, the music to this song is so great and I really cannot harp on the lyrics much. Even with the mediocre lyrics, there are a few funny lines here and there, and when you combine it with all the great parts that this song has, I think it's certain that this is a good song. It's really a simple and pleasant way to start the album, and while I think the other 5 album openers have definitely had better introductions, this song does fit real nicely on this album musically, with all the great melodies in this one. Next is a song that everyone associates as the turning point for the Beatles. Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, whatever you want to call it, this one is a real special song. The sitar is obviously the most distinguishable part of the song. It's really unique to have the main melody of a song be carried by an unknown instrument to the Western world, but yet they took a chance and the riff of the song is played on a sitar. Actually, the sitar doesn't just play the riff. Some parts you hear some other notes, and some other times you hear feedback played on the sitar as well throughout the track. It's one of the first Western songs to feature a sitar, and for that reason, it's really a standout on this album. However, there are definitely other standout parts of this song as well. The acoustic guitar work here is really sensational by John, as he sings in kind of a reflective way about a relationship that didn't turn out the way he wanted to. He actually would say later on that this song was about an affair he was having, which makes sense why most of the words to this song are rather difficult to figure out completely. The opening line to me is actually my favorite line of the song, just because of how iconic it is. Then we get to the vocal performance, which to me is one of the most relaxed yet brilliant vocal performances from John Lennon. The fact that he sings a rather downbeat song in such a positive fashion definitely brings back memories of Misery, but it works to perfection here because I could not imagine this song working in a completely negative tone. Obviously, this is not just a good song, it's a brilliant song, it's an amazing song, and so on and so forth. It's really one of the biggest leaps forward on this album that really represent the direction the Beatles were heading in. It's really one of the defining songs on this album just because of how unique the style of the song is. In 1965, I can't imagine people's reaction to this, and 52 years later, I'm still amazed. We get our first Paul McCartney breakup song with You Won't See Me. All that maturity, heartbreak, and tonality of Yesterday seems to have carried right over from Help onto this track. Paul McCartney is really good at translating his negative feelings into a breakup song, and songs like this really prove it. For starters, the rhythm here is really interesting and syncs up perfectly with the chorus. It's not an easy rhythm, but they still managed to really combine both the unique drum pattern and guitar explosion together to create quite an intense sound in the chorus. Speaking of sound, this song has absolutely insane harmonies between Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and John Lennon. Oddly, it's Paul McCartney singing a lower register here than George and John, which is quite rare considering Paul has a massive range in the upper register compared to what John and George have to offer. However, it actually works well here considering that George and John really blend their voices together perfectly well to create a nice melody on their own alongside Paul's great vocals. Just purely off sound, this one is a real treat on the album. It's definitely good, and really one of their most mature breakup songs with all the great lines we get here. Overall, we've seen kind of a more negative romantic portrayal over the last few tracks. Definitely a very interesting start to the album. After a whopping 5 albums over a span of 2 years, we finally have the very first Beatles song not about love, Nowhere Man. Leave it to John Lennon to finally break this trend of love songs that they've essentially mastered writing over the last few albums. The inspiration was actually just John Lennon lying down waiting for a song to come before coming up with Nowhere Man and A Nowhere Land and so on. Amazingly though, the lyrics aren't even the best part about this song despite how great they are. The best part without hesitation are those absolutely stunning harmonies, which are really amongst one of the best harmonies in any Beatles song without a doubt. The most appealing part about them is how distinctive they sound. Most harmonies are generally rather flat holding one note, but the harmonies here go all over the place in a good way. When we get to that chorus and the harmonies turn into ah la la, the whole song just becomes a heaven of sound. Honestly, the vocal work in the song is just unbelievable. The guitar work in the song does add a really great touch to the track, and the instrumentation on its own is definitely sensational. But man, the vocal work alone just really makes the song one of the best Beatles songs you've heard so far. It's definitely a good song, yet another song you could really say is a landmark track on this album. Not only for its subject matter, but how completely unique it sounds when compared to the previous Beatles albums. The first George Harrison track on this album, Think For Yourself. Once you know it, we follow up the first Beatles song not to be about love with another song that isn't about love either. Amazingly, it's not Paul McCartney who jumps ship next, but it's actually George Harrison. Now just remember that the last song we heard from George was You Like Me Too Much. I say that because my goodness, this song is a massive leap in quality lyrics-wise. The biggest inspiration for this actually might have been from George and John's first LSD trip in the spring of 1965, as well as a couple more acid trips throughout the same year. LSD is really one of those mind-expanding drugs, and no doubt that George Harrison felt similarly in that regard. This song's meaning is essentially in the title, but the words to this one are quite something. The words are given justice by yet another great showing from the harmonies. I mean, the harmonies in this song once again just really shine during the verses. It's so instantly likable because of it, but unlike in Nowhere Man, I think that the instrumentation in this one actually matches the quality of the vocals. The start here is that amazing double bass played by Paul McCartney. It's such a pounding sound and carries on throughout the track, really complementing those harmony lines during the verses. This one is yet another good song. It's hard to deny it as one of the biggest leaps in quality from one song to another by a writer. I mean, just compare the lyrics to this song and You Like Me Too Much back to back. You'll be quite amazed at how truly special this song is. Continuing the trend of non-love songs, we get The Word. This song is actually interesting lyrically because it's not a love song per se in the sense that it talks about a relationship or whatnot, but it's actually talking about love as an abstract concept. It's almost like a philosophical song in that regard. And yes, the Beatles are now doing philosophical songs after singing songs like She Loves You and I Wanna Hold Your Hand just 2 years prior. Seriously, the growth of this band is just incredible. Then again, Lennon and McCartney did write this song when they were high, so who knows what their inspiration was for this. Anyways, this song is definitely a step down quality-wise, but honestly it's not even by that much. The harmonies are still glorious, the musicianship is still incredible, and as I said, the words to this song are actually quite interesting. My favorite part here would actually have to be the harmonium solo near the end of the track because of how unique the sound is. This song isn't the only time it'll be used as a heads up. As for the song as a whole, I'm definitely calling it good. Sure, it's not too consequential compared to the rest of their discography, but the sound here is just so good and really fantastic, from the harmonium to the really great guitar work accompanying Lennon's voice on each of the verses, to the great harmonies I mentioned earlier. It's certainly a song that really represents what this album is about.
Michelle, my belle, Sunday mo qui vont très bien ensemble.
The last song of side 1 is Michelle by Paul McCartney. Amazingly, it seems to be the Paul McCartney songs that really blow up into being one of the most famous Beatles tracks, and this song is one of them. However, this one is real interesting musically. It's actually a glimpse at another culture containing a French-like atmosphere. Not only are some of the words in the song in French, but the guitar work and bass really sound like something you'd hear from France. The bass especially really makes quite an impact here, which is why it's the musical highlight, but we actually get a bass solo twice in this song, which really goes off to show how much of a Paul McCartney song this is. The biggest reason the song is so big though might just be because of the tone of the track. It's very schmaltzy, I feel, but I think Paul McCartney wanted it that way and he just took off with the concept. Since Paul is the master of these love songs, it's no surprise that it turned out absolutely incredible in the end. By the way, this is the 4th straight track with just insane harmonies. They really help create that schmaltzy mood in the background, and while they aren't nowhere man levels of great, they really help make this track quite memorable. Obviously, this song is good. It's really one of the best Beatles songs out there, and talking about this one doesn't do it enough justice, really.
What goes on in your heart? What goes on in your mind?
Starting off side 2, we get What Goes On, which is the very first song to have contributions to it by Ringo Starr. That means that all 4 Beatles have now contributed to at least one song so far. Ringo did say that his contributions were limited to a couple of words, but regardless, he did contribute to this song itself. So how is the song? Well, it's certainly weaker than a lot of stuff on the first side. For starters, the guitar work in the song is a sequence of short guitar notes or passages that sting through the speaker. It's not much of a bother to me personally, but I can imagine for anyone who really hates progressions like that, it could really devalue the song for them. There's also Ringo Starr's voice here, which I'm not too much of a fan of personally. Now, he definitely is a capable vocalist, but in songs like this, I think it's pretty clear that Paul and John just put him up to it because they don't want to sing it themselves. Despite what I just mentioned though, I still feel that this is a good song. The harmonies that were so great on many of those tracks from side 1 are back here, adding some nice balance to Ringo's vocals, and musically the guitar solo does make up for those recurring short notes we hear throughout the song. Even lyrically, there are a couple of lines in the song that are rather clever and fit Ringo's voice perfectly. Now, it's not a great song, but it's definitely a nice addition to this album, and no doubt that it fits alongside these other tracks. Next up is Girl. Phew. This is widely recognized as one of the most mature love songs by the Beatles, and despite some of the tracks from side 1 such as You Won't See Me and Michelle, I actually feel that this one is the lyrical masterpiece of the 3. I mean, some of the lines in the song are just so incredibly worded, and the last verse specifically is one of the all-time greatest lyrics in a Beatles song. Only John Lennon can come up with a track like this, and it really shows in the quality of the words. Then we get to the music, which is very similar to Michelle, in which the tonality of the track is different via another culture. In this case, we get Greek-influenced guitars and some really soft percussion to add to the melancholy feeling of the track. Also adding to that are once again the harmonies. In this case, they're more so background vocals, but the impact is definitely the same. I really enjoy them during the bridge of the track where they start saying tit tit tit, because that just perfectly represents who the Beatles were at this point. You can really tell on this album that they are having a blast, and this song is no different. It's definitely a good song, and personally, I'd rank it as one of the most mature songs I've ever heard, honestly. Just as a simple reminder that the song Little Child was released only 2 years prior to this song. I'll say it again, the change of this band is really something incredible.
You don't look different, but you have changed. I'm looking through you. You're not the same.
Next we get I'm Looking Through You, which is the second breakup song by Paul McCartney on this album. You might be thinking that 2 breakup songs by the same writer on an album is a step down, but personally this song is so different musically and even lyrically from You Won't See Me that it's completely understandable. For starters, the musicianship here is quite unique. The guitar work is completely original, being much more high-pitched, and it fits into the frustration of the track. My absolute favorite part is when the electric guitar just enters the mix around the chorus, the first time after Paul's incredible line, "You're not the same." It makes for a great entrance, and after that, the song just turns into a fantastic rocker. Speaking of Paul, this is definitely his best vocal performance on the album. Similar to songs like Yesterday, you can absolutely sense the tone of the song in his voice, and I can't imagine anyone else singing a song like this better than Paul McCartney. His vocals just soar during the chorus, which is the vocal highlight for a reason, when he sings that line I mentioned earlier. The fade out of this track is also pretty awesome, with Paul McCartney pelting out what seems to be an improv of the lyrics. Let's also talk about that percussion, because believe it or not, there are no drums on the song. The percussion consists of Ringo Starr literally tapping a matchbox. Songs like Yesterday have definitely worked without percussion, but this song takes it up a notch by finding the perfect sound to accompany the instruments, and who would have thought that the sound of a matchbox would be perfect? Just incredible stuff if you ask me, and without a doubt, this is a great song. It's one of the highlights of the album, and in my opinion, one of the greatest breakup songs by Paul McCartney. His relationship with Jane Asher may have definitely been rocky, but the impacts of it musically were quite great.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed.
Oh man, here we are, the classic song of the album, In My Life. I can't think of a more fitting track to include on this album than this one, honestly. Everything great about all the tracks I've mentioned up to this point are all found in this song. The harmonies are very delicate, along with John Lennon's sensational singing. The guitar riff is very haunting, yet incredibly soft. And the lyrics, let's talk about them. It was originally just Lennon writing about a bunch of locations on his bus route around Liverpool, but it evolved into a nostalgia song, which John then turned very personal. The theme here is the desire to return to the past, yet cherish the present. The most amazing line, though, is when he compares his entire past and foundation to his lover, and chooses his lover over his past. That, folks, is really deep and incredibly mature, which has just been so consistent on this album. John Lennon would call this song the first real song he ever wrote, and honestly, even though songs like I'm a Loser, Help, You Got to Hide Your Love Away, and Yes It Is were very personal, I'd have to agree with him on that, because lyrically, this song is really one of a kind. The last thing to mention here is that Baroque piano solo at the end. It was actually their producer, George Martin, who played that, and he sped up the tape of him playing it to make it sound like a harpsichord. It's definitely a nice ending to the song, and as for the song itself, is it even a question that this one is good? It's one of the greatest songs, not only by the Beatles, but of all time as far as I'm concerned. After a song like this, it's safe to say that John Lennon officially grew up.
Wait till I come back to your side. We forget the tears we cried.
After the emotional upheaval of the last track, we get another Paul McCartney track, Wait. Now, some sources say that this was a collaboration since Paul and John essentially sing this one together for most of the time, but Lennon and McCartney themselves both said that it was a Paul McCartney song, so I'm going to go off that. It definitely has a feeling of a Paul McCartney song, though, off the lyrics itself. The lyrics here are probably the low light, though, because they have definitely been done before by the Beatles twice, in songs like It Won't Be Long and When I Get Home. However, those two songs were written by John Lennon, and this is the first time that this theme was done by Paul McCartney, so to an extent, it's not too bad. The lyrics certainly get made up for, though, by the return of the volume pedal guitar. Sure enough, this song was intended to be on Help, and I guess during the sessions of I Need You, the Beatles really dug the sound of the guitar pedal and they used it here as well. It adds a really nice touch to the end of every verse before exploding during the chorus. Speaking of the guitar, it also has a very profound effect during the bridge where the section essentially crescendos while Paul sings about returning home. It's incredibly effective and not too far off from the effects of a song like She Loves You and I Wanna Hold Your Hand. In terms of the overall quality, I'd still call this a good song, but similar to What Goes On, it's one of the less memorable tracks on the album because there's really not much innovation that goes on here in comparison to the other tracks we've seen so far. Despite that though, this one is definitely one of my personal favorites on the album.
If I had some more time to spend, then I guess I'd be with you, my friend. If I needed someone.
Next up is the second and final George Harrison track, If I Needed Someone. If you're a fan of the 1960s and listened to this track for the first time, you might have thought you were listening to the Byrds instead of the Beatles based on the guitar work. For those who don't know, the Byrds were the masters of the Rickenbacker folk sound, and they just happened to influence the Beatles around this time, so sure enough, George Harrison wrote this as sort of a tribute to them. This is honestly one of the best sounding songs on the album, and with all the competition it's had, that's quite an accomplishment. First off, the melody on this song is just so good. It has two major catchy parts to me, the verses with the great guitar riff, and then the bridge, which is one of George Harrison's best vocal moments as his voice serves as a really good hook. That's definitely the vocal highlight for a reason, and in terms of the criticism I did give George on tracks such as Do You Want to Know a Secret and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, he's really grown as a singer and songwriter since that, and songwriting wise, Think For Yourself is the highlight, but singing wise it's definitely this track. With the great sound of this song, it's very easy to say that this is a sensational one. Sure, it's not too original in terms of its sound, but the fact that the Beatles were able to easily replicate a new style is just amazing. Not only that, but the song really flows so smoothly and incorporates all the greatness we've seen from all the great tracks so far. Honestly, this is a great way to end off one of the best albums I've ever heard. Oh wait.
You better run for your life if you can, little girl. Hide your head in the sand, little girl. Catch you with another man, that's the end, little girl.
You're kidding me, right? Well, folks, for the third straight album, we don't get the album closer we want, and instead we get, well, Run For Your Life. Personally, a track like this amazes me because it's one of the most mixed bag songs I've ever heard. The sound of this one is absolutely sensational, and if you were going off the sound alone, okay, maybe it's not so bad. But then we get to the lyrics, and well, they're really uncomfortable to listen to.
This be a sermon, I mean everything I said. Baby, I'm determined and I'd rather see you dead.
John Lennon has stated in numerous interviews that he regrets writing the song, and the lyrics are definitely some of his worst just off the message. On side 1, he co-wrote a song about accepting the word love, but it seems like he does a complete 180 here and now talks about hurting a woman. It's really unsettling to hear the lyrics, and it's sad because the melody to this song is really great, and guitar work is really up in your face and brilliant. But it's just difficult for me to call a song like this good with the atrocious words I'm hearing throughout. I didn't even know what to rate this at first, but I'm gonna have to go with okay. It's a shame that 2 albums in a row have gotten blocked from going a perfect 14 on good, but I'm sorry guys, I just can't get over the lyrics here. But if you like this song though, or even hate this song, I completely understand. It's quite the controversial one.
The day trip up, a one-way ticket, yeah. It took me so long to find out, and I found out.
Speaking of doing 180s, we get the rocker Day Tripper as the first single to talk about. This song is definitely sensational in every way. First off, this guitar riff is among one of the greatest guitar riffs I've ever heard. It was this song that actually made me want to pick up the guitar just so I can play this absolutely amazing riff. John Lennon has claimed that this song's riff and guitar parts were all from him, so I'd have to credit him as the genius behind the guitar work. But the riff definitely does remind me of Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman, so that perhaps might have been another inspiration. Despite John though coming up with the great music here, Paul McCartney to me is the one who shines here as the vocalist. He does sing along with Lennon for most of the track, but during the first and third lines of each verse, he He's singing the higher notes on his own, and my absolute favorite moment of the song is the very first line, "Got a good reason."
Got a good reason for taking the easy way out.
Which is one of my all-time favorite line deliveries in any song. I can't even explain why I love it so much, honestly, but he just sets the tone for the track so well after that. The lyrics to this track are highly representative of the direction the Beatles were heading in, with a lot of references to sex, which we did see in Ticket to Ride, but not as much as we do here. The lyric I have up there was probably my favorite just off how unsubtle it was. The Beatles singing about prick teasers alone should catch your eye, but regardless, this song is all-time brilliant. It's one of my personal favorite Beatles songs and really one of the most hardcore rock songs of the early 60s.
Run a risk of knowing that our love may soon be gone. We can work it out. We can work it out.
Last song to talk about is We Can Work It Out, which is a collaboration between Paul and John. Paul McCartney is responsible for most of the track, with the verses being about working things out in a relationship, while the bridge is all about John being about hurrying things up before time runs out. It's the first song to me that highlights the yin-yang nature of Paul and John. Paul is optimistic here while John is pessimistic, and the combination of the two is just a great match. The bridge, by the way, is really interesting, as the song actually changes time signatures to a 3x4 waltz before returning back to normal.
And there's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend.
This idea, by the way, was by George Harrison, who doesn't even play on the track, so the group dynamic is certainly strong as a result. Anyways, this song personally represents the end of an era to me, and I said that in Help, but here I feel it represents the end of an era as the Beatles touring-wise. One more song from their next album sessions would be added to their concert list, but I feel that with this song and Rubber Soul, the Beatles will have officially really moved on to a new stage in their careers. The song itself kind of has that feeling of resignation that things will get better, and that certainly plays a role in why it's so fondly remembered. Without a doubt, this one is great. The optimistic-pessimistic duo of Lennon and McCartney really helped make the song so enjoyable, and with the song changing during the bridge, it keeps you more attentive and focused on it, or else you'll miss out. It's certainly one of their best songs though, and it would be one of the last instances of a true Lennon-McCartney collaboration for quite a while. So that was Rubber Soul. Really one of their most phenomenal albums ever, and you saw how distinct each track was from each other as the album progressed through. From Drive My Car to Run For Your Life, the album always threw something new and completely unexpected at you, which really helped make this album more interesting. Hopefully I explained why each track was quite innovative, and if I didn't, you did hear the samples yourself, so if you've been following along, the songs really sounded much different than their previous work, which truly is a great progression. Most importantly, I'll say it again, they did all this in just 4 months' time, so it's really phenomenal how quickly this change came about. Let's now look at the overview, and as you see, there were 15 good songs, 1 okay song, and 0 bad songs. We still haven't gotten the 100% good album yet, but Rubber Soul's 15 songs were really exceptional. I'd say about 10 of those 15 were among their finest songs ever, and 3 of them are all-time greats. Certainly not a bad thing though when an album has no bad songs. As for the Beatles performance rankings, Paul has overtaken John for this first spot, while George has had an incredible album, leaping him to only 1 behind John for second. It's a tight race, and I feel that even Ringo Starr will eventually get into the swing of things. In all seriousness though, everyone on this album was really exceptional, and without any of the Beatles, the result may have turned out very differently. Let's now head into the album rankings, and as you can see, Rubber Soul has taken over the first spot. That's now the second straight album where the album I reviewed has gone first, but honestly an album like this just can't be replicated, whereas with the other albums it topped, they definitely did have some lackluster content in them one way or another. The only bad thing about this album at all were either Run For Your Life's lyrics, or maybe even What Goes On's guitar style, but those were definitely very minor complaints to an otherwise perfect album. Song rankings wise, you can see that our new number 1 is In My Life, and it shouldn't be much of a surprise really. As great as Yesterday is, In My Life just showcased the maturity and growth of the Beatles as a whole, and especially with John Lennon. It's really a one-of-a-kind song. After that, in Yesterday, there's definitely a lot of shuffling, which will always be a theme with the song rankings. As we head into Revolver and Pepper, oh boy, it'll be quite a change. With all that said and done though, let's wrap up this video with 3 observations I made about this album. First and foremost is the musical experimentation. And I did understand that Help in previous albums did have some of this, but Rubber Soul really contained the most musical experimentation I've ever seen up to this point. The sitar on Norwegian Wood, the matchbox on I'm Looking Through You, the double bass on Think For Yourself, and I can just keep going on and on about all the different ways that each of these tracks were crafted. It's really a unique album as a result because of all this musical experimentation. It's more difficult to recreate, and really, most of the songs on this album weren't even played live as a result because they were so complex to reproduce. Songs like Nowhere Man, If I Needed Someone, and Day Tripper were the only ones that were actually performed live during the Beatles' tenure, which is amazing to think. However, keep in mind that the Beatles were only 7 to 8 months away from quitting touring altogether, so we are nearing the end of the Beatles' touring days. Even if they kept going though, the songs on this album really were produced in a way where it would have been close to impossible to replicate them live. Personally though, that only made the studio album stronger, and in this case, we already know how much praise Rubber Soul has gotten. The second observation are the harmonies. Most of the song's vocal highlights throughout this were the harmonies, and for good reason. They were just amazing and completely unique with each track. Songs like Nowhere Man and Think For Yourself really just went above and beyond with the sound of their harmonies, while other songs like Michelle and Girl used them to really further complement the other aspects of the track. As a whole, this album already has a nickname of the Pot Album, but I think you should also name this the Harmony Album because the sound they achieved with their voices on here is really sensational. Again, the Beach Boys and Queen aren't the only bands that really went above and beyond with their harmonies on their studio albums. You definitely have to add the Beatles onto that list after an album like this. Anyways, the last observation I made was the wrong ending part 3. Fortunately, they didn't end with the song like Dizzy Miss Lizzy, but I still have to question why they picked Run For Your Life as the album closure. Why not If I Needed Someone? Why not In My Life? Just something better than the song that happened to be the worst of the album. I'm getting really tired of complaining about this, and I'm sure you guys are as well, so I'll leave it as that, but if there's one thing the Beatles really just don't get right at this point, it's closing their albums. All that said though, the influence of Rubber Soul cannot be overstated. Not only did it help influence the psychedelic rock genre, which was starting to arrive after the Yardbirds and the Kinks kind of kickstarted it, but songs like Norwegian Wood really helped popularize the sitar and introduce Western audiences to Indian music. I would argue that the 1960s musical revolution began with Rubber Soul. Almost every artist you hear from that decade cites Rubber Soul as not only the album that changed their perspective on the Beatles, but the album that would inspire them. Beach Boys member Brian Wilson would cite Rubber Soul as the inspiration for the legendary album Pet Sounds. That same album would inspire songs from albums such as Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. The Rolling Stones would soon begin incorporating psychedelia into their music with songs like Paint It Black. Bottom line, this album is truly landmark, and there's a bigger reason behind just music quality for why this album is really cited as the greatest album of all time. It's the album that introduced a new era upon the music world, an era in which the Beatles themselves would drastically change. There may be just one more album that will fully highlight the direction the Beatles will now be heading in. Join me next time when I talk about that album, which is often regarded as perhaps the greatest album in all of music, Revolver.